Greetings, friends. Welcome to podcast number 1 for Tena and Kaz. My name is Kaz van der Vaart, and Tena is here with me, and I'm here with Tena. So, welcome, Tena, also.
Hello, everyone.
And what we've decided to do is, this is podcast number 1 for Tena and Kaz. So, you'll probably see, or you will have seen on this group as well, or if you're listening to it on YouTube, you will have seen that we've done some for Beautiful Souls as well, but we decided that there are a lot of topics that we wanted to cover that are not necessarily outside the realm of Beautiful Souls, but we decided to set up Tena and Kaz because we just have so much in common, and it's very interesting. One of those things actually that we have in common, and we were just speaking about before we came on this live, is that I was heading for the friarhood or priesthood some time ago, and Tena was heading to become a nun some time ago. So that's very interesting, and that was part of our story or our spiritual journey or journey in general in life. And I had just said to Tena a while ago that I had just come, and I don't class myself as religious now, which is quite funny, but I am, I had just come from confession, from a Catholic confession some time ago today, and I do that on occasion, and it's not necessarily that I felt guilty about anything. I was just saying to Tena, I like that as one of the sacraments of the Catholic faith. I really enjoy going there, and just because I have kind of steered away from the church and stuff like that, or not steered away from it, but that was probably the wrong word. Like, just because I don't go there as often anymore doesn't mean that I don't drop in from time to time. The same as I'll drop into, like, if I see a Hindu temple or a Buddhist temple, if I'm out of town,
Yes,
or a mosque,
exactly.
or even a mosque. And the interesting thing there is that, I was just saying to Tena too that I went to that confession, and the reason I went there was to kind of, I guess, just talk, and I guess there was a little, there was a little guilt when I went to that confession, but in general, there usually isn't. But I just felt like, okay, I wanted to kind of be there with someone else and just discuss some issues, and that's why I used it. So I don't believe necessarily that the priest forgave me as a man of God or anything like that. I believe that I went directly to the source, to God, before I ever went to that confession, and I just feel that was it's an aid to me on my spiritual path. And it's just the same if there had been a Buddhist temple nearby, I may have gone and chatted to a Buddhist monk or something like that. And I just think that was, the reason I shared that right now is because I thought it was very interesting that that we're doing podcast number 1, and I've just come from a confessional. And actually, another funny thing is there was exposition of the Blessed Sacrament. So within Catholicism, you have, where they believe that Jesus Christ was or is present in the host. So when you go to receive communion in a Catholic church, they believe that the bread that you get, or that circular host, what they call, they believe that Jesus Christ is alive within that, and that is the body of Jesus Christ. Now, personally, I don't know about that. I've read lots of books on the subject and stuff like that, but I do believe there's some power in that. So, the same way as I believe there's power within the confessional, and the same way as I believe that kneeling in front of, that host when it is outside upon the altar, I believe that there is great power from that also, and great power within a sacred space of a church or a mosque or a Hindu temple or a Buddhist temple, or the same way as somebody could get tattooed by a Buddhist monk and that tattoo could be blessed. I also believe that to be, very, very sacred, very, very special. And it may sound contradictory, but again, I'm approaching this from a non-religious standpoint, if that makes sense, although we're even talking about religion. So yeah, that's been my afternoon so far, but yeah.
A busy afternoon.
Yeah.
Busy and interesting afternoon.
Yeah.
I love this topic, and I've got to say it's probably one of the most fascinating topics to me. The spirituality of each person is so unique. Their experiences are different. like you, instead of conforming to one religion, I'm not a religious person as much as I am spiritual. And there's a lot of beauty within the Catholic faith. And I too will go to, there's a Catholic church in a town not far from me that I will visit. And I just love sometimes sitting there in the quiet. I'll go and light a candle and sit there in the quiet with my rosary. Sometimes I'll speak with the priest, sometimes I don't. But there is a feeling when I walk into a place like that. It's the same. I have a Buddhist temple that's a fair drive for me away, so I don't go to it as often. But for the audience, for people who don't know, Kaz is in Ireland, and I'm in Texas, and I'm in small town Texas, so we're surrounded by predominantly Protestant churches. I don't know about you, Kaz, but I know here, I'm not saying this is true all over the country or even all over Texas, but I know where we're located in North Texas, there isn't quite the diversity that you might find somewhere else. So you really have to travel a good distance to locate a mosque, a Buddhist temple, a Hindu temple. They're there, it's just not as easily accessible. But I find each of these places to be sacred. And I feel the energy shift in me anytime I walk into a sacred place. Anytime I walk into a sacred space, I feel the energy inside of me shift and I become calm. And things seem to become clearer to me. I don't know if that makes any sense at all. That might sound crazy, but that's just my personal experience.
It makes a lot of sense to me. It really does, because when we're in those spaces, it's like there's that energy or that can you still hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, it's that energy or that, I guess that it's held within the place where it is, or it's just I guess when I think of it as energy, I think, okay, so many people have prayed here over such a long period of time or have visited.
Yes.
And I guess that actually holds, that thing in the space that's there, I guess. And it's funny.
Yes.
Yeah, it's funny. And even now I'm actually parked outside. This is hilarious. I didn't recognize it until I got on here. But I'm in a different town than I was this morning, and I'm parked outside a church and a graveyard right now. And I just thought, when I was looking at the graves, just they're right in front of me, there's this guy and he's mowing a lawn around a grave, taking care of a grave. And I just thought to myself, that's quite interesting that actually happened that way. And the other thing I thought is, I no longer fear death, and I used to fear death every single day. And it wasn't until, funnily enough, I started studying the Upanishads and the Gita within Hinduism that I actually no longer fear that, and I actually believe that I am a soul residing within this physical human body that I like to call the earth suit, or my earth suit. And when I pass on for here, I hope I will have done, I hope I will have done my best, and I hope that, if there is, I guess I do believe that we ascend to higher planes, or, when some people say they believe, where within those religions where you come back and, I don't think, no, don't quote me on this, but I don't think you can go back down the rungs of the ladder, if that makes sense, back down to the animal kingdom. No, I may be wrong on that.
Okay, you're talking about reincarnation.
Yeah, reincarnation, like
based on like your karma, your acts, what you do, is going to determine what you come back as in the next life. I don't want to offend any of my Buddhist friends. I do believe karma exists, but I don't agree, I don't believe in that. I don't believe that if, for instance, a child is born without legs, it's because in a past life they picked the leg off of a grasshopper. I actually had someone in a Buddhist forum tell me that. Okay. And I was deeply disturbed by it. Yeah. Deeply, deeply disturbed by it. Something that I was just thinking as you were talking about the cemetery, and I was thinking of sacred spaces, I have the same feeling when I walk in nature. That same feeling of calm, that same feeling of connecting to a higher power when I walk in nature. And I'll be drawn to a specific tree. I don't know why. I just am. I go with that. And then when you were talking about tattoos being blessed by a monk, and that's sacred, I wonder if places and objects become sacred because that's how we view them. We're changing our mindset, therefore it becomes something sacred. Does that make sense at all?
It does make sense, because what jumped out to me there when you said that was a lot of things, and that's happening a lot lately, where people say stuff to me or certain lines, and I realize that I'm researching and I've lived so much already at such a young age, and I say that at 30, I'm almost 34, but the reason I say that is that every time someone says something to me recently, and I don't know if it's the awareness or whatever, I tend to pull something out of somewhere that I've read or whatever, and what matched up what you just said there was, I was recently listening to something. It was from, I think it was Sermon on the Mount by Emmett Fox, or it was something that Emmett Fox said, and one of the things was where there are as many universes, in existence as there are people to create them, and I think that was very interesting, because what you said.
I love that.
Yeah. Do you think, like what you said? Do you think like that we have some kind of part to play in that regarding the. I kind of lost my train of thought. I know what you were saying. You were saying, can you, yes, that like, do I think that it has part to play? What was the exact question? Sorry, Tina, because I lost it.
No, that's okay. I was just thinking, I was wondering if places and objects become sacred.
Yes.
Because we change our mindset.
I think so. Like, I think, yeah, because that's what it was, like, the thinking, so, like,
what draws us, what drew those first people to that particular monastery?
Yeah.
Or what drew me to a particular tree that I might have passed in my car 1,000 times and never noticed.
It's so interesting because, and sorry to interrupt you, but it's so interesting.
No.
Because like that, when we, I guess the thing I was saying about the Emmett Fox thing, there are so many universes there are as many universes as there are people to create them. And what I was thinking about that is, like, when you said exactly about that thing, like, I think that in our mind we can tend to say, like, okay, this place is sacred, or and to someone else it might not be sacred, and it
right. What made me think of this question, just, I don't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
I don't want our audience to think I'm just jumping all over the place. What made me think of that question was when you were describing what you believed in the afterlife.
Yes.
Because I believe similar to you. But then it dawned on me, I have friends who really, I mean, they believe in reincarnation. And for them, that is a sacred belief. And then when you were talking about Hinduism and how you learn to overcome your fear of death by studying that, that's what made me think of that question.
Yeah. It's very interesting because that actual thing of let's say we're thinking a certain way about a certain place or a thing or a time or whatever, and like when I said about the universes where there are as many universes as there are people who create them, like the way I was thinking about that is okay. And I've come across some more stuff about different stuff recently, kind of in relation to this topic. And one of the things was, okay, so let's say, and this kind of draws or goes along with what you were just saying, where let's say you were, as a Catholic, I believe, okay, if I do X, Y, and Z, then, and I'm not saying I'm a Catholic, but if someone is a Catholic and they believe X, Y, and Z, does that mean then if they believe that they're going to hellfire and brimstone, that they actually go there? Or in the case of, okay, I stepped on the leg of a grasshopper, so I'm going to come back as a cat, like all these things are kind of, it's very interesting to me because when I think about, okay, if there are as many universes and we create them, do we then literally in this life, do we have the ability to think and create
our own hell or heaven?
Yeah. And does that mean that then we will, because in life in general, I believe that it's an exact and precise law that what I hold within my mind, I will eventually, see that in my life. Like I do believe that because I've experienced that, and I've
oh, me too. I was just gonna say I have experienced that myself. So that's
it's very interesting because then I think, okay, on this physical plane where we are right now and we're living and all that, and I've created hell on this earth, but I've also created beauty through my imagination once I understood the fact that I can do that. But then that gets me questioning and thinking, okay, and I'm so glad that we're doing this podcast because it gives us the ability to just throw this stuff out there, and I hope that I hope that people listening, enjoy it too. And that is like, okay, if I'm thinking a certain way, does that mean that when I pass on from this life that I then have created my own reality in the next thing or whatever? It's very interesting. It's kind of,
That's a really interesting, that concept had never crossed my mind. Can we create our own heaven or our own hell?
Yeah.
I know from my own personal experience that in this life, I have created living hells for myself, but I've also created beauty.
Yes.
And to me, sacredness in my children. So when I look at my children, I see heaven on earth. They're very sacred to me. So it's interesting. That's really, really interesting. I know. Did you grow up Catholic?
Okay, so I grew up with a grandmother who was staunch Catholic, but then really, really heavy duty Catholic, and was a very practicing, but at the same time had her own views that in my view today were at that time very hellish and still can be today. And what I mean by that is that it was very and by the way, I don't condemn her or anything for that. It's just the way she is, and that's okay. And I'm able to accept her as she is that way, and she's a wonderful person. But when it comes to the what would you say, ideological view of what she was brought up with, and she brought that into her household and all that. So yes. I was around her a lot when I was younger, so I grew up believing a lot of that stuff, this hellfire and brimstone, the God in the sky.
See, I did too,
Yeah, like the God in the sky with the beard, and you're going to you're going to hell if you do X, Y, or Z. If there is any sex on TV, it's switched off straight away. That's dirty. Don't look at it. You know, and I'm going into this. I'm delving deep because it's important for, I guess, people to understand, and especially when you ask the question, that's what was said. You know, don't watch that. It's dirty.
Yes.
You can't say this. It was very repressive old Irish Catholic kind of society in a sense, because a lot of people were believing the same thing. And not only that, but also not only within the society, but within the household. And so I grew up with that part of, like, so that was part of her thing. But then also, later on, when I was a little older, she got into born again Christianity. So there was a kind of mix of born again Christianity with the repressive Catholic views. Yeah, so there was a kind of a crossbreed of a religion coming out of that. And then I was kind of like, I was subject to that because I was around them a lot. And so I picked up a lot on that. And a great deal of guilt and shame came around the time when I became, sexually active or whatever, or grew into puberty or adolescence, where I had like, oh my God, if I do X, Y, or Z, this is like, I'm going to hell. And still to this day, believe it or not, although I've gotten rid of a lot of the paradigms and a lot of that stuff, there can still be that little bit of, like, I've pretty much got rid of, I would say 99.9%, but there are still times when I'm like, oh my God, you're going to hell. And it's like,
that's the same with me.
Yeah.
I'm the same way. I'm 47.
Yeah,
and I grew up the opposite. I grew up in a very strict Protestant home. Yeah. We were Southern Baptist.
Okay.
And it was coupled with addiction.
Yes.
So there was all kinds of dysfunction, and the hellfire and brimstone. I can remember being as young as 4 or 5 years old and going to bed and tucking the sheet. This is going to sound ridiculous. Tucking the sheet in all the way around, and it had to be right up to my chin, because I was convinced that if I fell asleep and the sheet wasn't tucked in all the way around my body tightly, a demon was going to grab me and take me to hell.
Yeah.
Because of something I might have dreamt. So there was a lot that can be damaging to a child.
100%, yeah.
And we should talk about that in another podcast, because that alone would take up an hour.
I agree. I agree. And I like what you just said there. I didn't have it to that level, but what I did have was, so if I thought in a certain way that was contradictory to what they were thinking or whatever. And I think it's very important, because later on I studied a lot about, different psychology and law of attraction and all that stuff. And one of the things that I came across, which, was very interesting to me, was the conscious and the subconscious mind. And like, the Jesuits said, Jesuit priests, along with actually Hitler, said the same thing: give me a child until he's 7 and I will show you the man. And the point being was that our mind, our subconscious, is wide open, or we don't have a conscious mind up until a certain age. I think it's the age of 4, 5, 6, or 7 or whatever, where we develop our own conscious mind. Or, well, it's probably younger than that, but a lot of the initial stuff that goes into the subconscious, because our subconscious is wide open, we're basically programmed. And so in the case of the religious stuff, what you're talking about and what I'm talking about here, a lot of that stuff is like programming. And so when I got older and I realized that, I was able to then, through affirmation, and we can go into that in another podcast too, but through affirmation and through speaking, my truth and making sure that that's sunk into my subconscious mind, I was then able to heal from a lot of that stuff that we just spoke about. So it's very interesting stuff.
Well, for me, it's incredibly interesting. What I have read is that by the time a child is 6 to 8 years of age, they've developed the core. They've developed the foundation of which they're going to build their entire life on.
Yep.
So all of these things subconsciously are spinning around in a child, and they're going to create the foundation of what they believe in as they get older and become adults at such a young age. So in our household, we've never spoken of hell or Satan or demons. I mean, the children have grown up in a Christian home, but with Christian ideologies. But because I'm open spiritually, they've also grown up with the okay to find their own way. I left the church when I was 16 years old, angry, very angry. And I really wanted to hate God, and I really wanted to just not believe. But for me personally, I never could shake the feeling that there had to be something. Not had, there was something greater than myself. And a dear friend of mine invited me to go to church with her. She was Catholic, and I was almost 18. And that was when I was introduced to Catholicism. And in my mind, that just made sense. Catholicism just made sense to me. So it's interesting. And then I went through another shift as I entered my early to mid 20s, where I began searching for God in all things. And I began with Hinduism, and then Judaism, and in recent years, Buddhism. And I say this humbly, in my mind, I see God in all religions and all faith. And I think that our higher power speaks to us in a voice that we're going to understand. I don't know if that makes sense. And I'm hoping to our audience, people will understand what I'm saying. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a way you speak to children to help them understand something that's different from the way you might speak to a peer, another adult. And I think God speaks to us wherever we're at in a voice we're going to understand.
I think that's a beautiful thing that you said that, because okay, so I once had a sponsor, right? When I was in one of the fellowships. So, you know, I did that whole thing of when I got sober and stuff like that, which we'll speak about in different podcasts too. But I'm sober over like 10 years now, from various addictions and alcoholism and stuff like that. But I once had a sponsor.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to be alive and sober. And one of the very interesting things that a sponsor I had one time said to me was, he said exactly what you said, that sometimes people are called to certain ways. And he said, because he was a staunch Catholic as well, and he admitted it, and he said, I'm so sorry, sometimes my beliefs will come across strong, but it's just what I believe. And I said, I understand. And I was able to accept that fact. And generally, he was pretty good in like saying, being able to just speak about, his experience and stuff, but sometimes he would just come across as like, okay, you need to do what I'm doing. And then he would apologize after, which was a nice thing, and he recognized it, and he was aware of that. But one of the things he said that I'll never forget is that I was telling him that, because at the time I was really into Catholicism still, and I had kind of found a new love for it, if that makes sense, getting sober, because it was the only God I knew, and that was initially that was what got me sober. I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to Catholicism. I went to Mass, I went, all the things that I just spoke about today, but for different reasons. I was going to confession and doing all these things because I felt guilty at that time. Now, today I go because I don't feel guilty, but at that time I was. So one of the things he said was that, because we had this discussion, and I said, I feel very drawn to Hinduism. And he said, well, and then he stopped in his tone of voice. He said, well, okay, because he had clocked himself saying, that, okay, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind with this Catholic stuff, but he didn't. And he said, well, you know what I've noticed? He said, I've noticed that people get drawn to many, many different things, and they're called by God to many different things. So he said, I think what you should do is pursue that, and I think what you should do is look into it. And his suggestion to me was that, okay, just go and see, read. He said, do some research. He said, use your critical thinking, think. And it was really good advice, and it's the exact same thing that you just said, which is that people are called to many different disciplines, and even Thomas Keating says it, and he's a Jesuit friar who also lived in community with Thomas Merton, one of the great Christian writers as well. And
I love him.
Yeah, and he said what you should do is if you feel called, so very early on, and I've done a video of this as well, about a year or two into sobriety. I had, I felt called to Islam, and I pursued it. I mean, I pursued it with all my heart, with all my mind. I really went that direction. I went, I was praying 5 times a day. I had completely left go of the Catholicism. I was doing the absolutions, I was doing all the different things. So I was washing myself the 5 times a day. I was facing Mecca to pray. I was doing all that stuff. I was praying to that one God, which they call, Allah, and okay, that's all that stuff. And, I did that too because I felt called to that. Did it help me? Absolutely. At that time, yes. Later on, did I grow out of that and kind of, come away from that? Yes, because at the time, I just, I felt, okay, I'm putting all my heart and my effort into this because I felt called to it. It definitely gave me a deeper relationship with, I guess, it gave me, I can't say a deeper relationship with God, because at that time it did give me a deeper relationship with God, absolutely. Later on, looking back in it, when I kind of left and moved away from that, it definitely gave me a greater understanding of prayer and how I was praying. And so sometimes I take, because one thing I will say, which I love to prostrate myself face down, so flat out. Friars do it a lot. Priests do, well, I don't know if priests do it a lot. But in Islam, they do that, and they basically, they kind of bow towards Mecca, but priests will prostrate themselves before the host or the Eucharist. I just tend to now prostrate myself sometimes, not all the time. I will just lie flat out and I'll say, okay, I believe that, the way I look at it now, I kind of imagine, and this is just one form of prayer I use certain times. It's a tool in my toolbox, but I many different times I'll be called to different forms of prayer. But one of the things I imagine is there's a ball of light above where I'm lying, and that I'm kind of submitting to that ball of light, and I believe that ball of light to be love, divine love light, and I'll just say, look, can you help me, ball of light, or whatever, I'll say divine love light. I'll say divine love light, can you help me in this day I'm in, because I'm struggling with X, Y, or Z. I may lie there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour. I may lie there for 2 minutes if I'm struggling with a certain issue. And that's just one thing. But then at a different time I may pray, and I may pray to the, I believe that the God seed or divine love light resides within me. That's just my belief also. So, I use that at different times. Well, I use that mostly. I actually use that one mostly, but sometimes I just want to kind of give the contrast for anyone listening that, it can be a Catholicism thing or an Islam thing or whatever. And I love the fact that I've moved through my life and I've been in contact with all these religions, and I'm very happy
Oh, so do I.
because it's helping me so much. And the very last thing I'll say there, is that even recently I've been looking into like Kemetic spirituality, so ancient Egyptian stuff, and the sun god Ra, and like, you know, the sun as like, because I do believe, you know, that is a power too, you know. So I don't know, it's just, these are all, you know, things to be taken as they are. And just to come back on the thing that you just said, the reason I kind of went into that whole rant about what I was just saying was that you said that people are called and can be called in many different forms and ways to God, and that is just my experience with it.
It is mine as well. I had made the decision in my early 20s to become a nun. And early to mid 20s, I guess. I guess I was 23 when I started really, that was heavily weighing on my heart. And at 25, I met my husband. And I was really torn. I mean, really, really torn. I loved the concept of being completely devoted to God and serving my life as a sister. And I found such joy. I can't even begin to describe the joy I felt in that. But there were things I struggled with that wouldn't be permitted if I wanted to become a nun. One of which was to marry and have a child. You can't do that if you're going to become a nun.
Yes.
And I remember talking to a beloved teacher of mine, and a truly holy man, and telling him, confessing this, and telling him that I was conflicted and I didn't know what to do. And I remember his voice sounded just angelic. I kid you not, it sounded angelic. And he told me there were many ways to serve God. And for some, nothing purer than motherhood.
It's a beautiful thing.
And that was a real eye-opener for me, because he didn't have to say that. He didn't have to say, he could have said anything. He was Catholic. He could have said, no, you're just being tempted, you know, but he didn't. And I remember realizing, really embracing at that point, the realization that God is truly in all things. Pick up a stone, there God is. In the wind, when the leaves rustle in a tree, you'll find God. There is nowhere, or the divine, or Allah, or whatever you want to call a higher power. The sun, you were talking about the sun. There is such healing in walking out into my front pasture barefoot on a cool morning and watching the sunrise and feeling the light of the sun wash over me. Such healing in that. Um, I realized at that point, going back to my story, sorry, I kind of got off track there. I realized all of these different avenues are just different paths. In Buddhism, we call it, we say there are many different paths up the mountain, but they all lead to the top of the mountain. And what that means is really no path is wrong. Learn. If something interests you, read about it. You might decide you want to study it, like Zen Buddhism or Taoism, Tibetan Buddhism. There's so many different ways that we can reach our higher self. And what I think I'm beginning to realize is that as we reach higher levels of consciousness, these, what I call lower thoughts, like categorizing everything, generalizing everything, really is separating us from what really matters, which is living in peace and in love and in harmony with those around us. I don't know, does that make sense?
It does make sense because I actually had this conversation as well with someone recently where we were talking about labeling certain things, and I said being, I said not to class myself as any one thing, but I said, okay, so basically I changed my diet a few years ago, and it's predominantly plant-based, so it's plant-based, but I don't class myself as a vegan, although I love animals and I like, I eat a plant-based diet. I don't class myself as a vegan because I don't label myself as that. Now, there are many people who then would disagree with that and say like, oh, but why don't you label yourself as a vegan if you're eating a plant-based diet? Because I don't conform to any one kind of thing, if that makes sense. And that's what I kind of get from out of what you're saying there about like...
Yes, exactly. It leaves you open to grow in even more directions.
And one of the reasons that I adopted that diet was just because it just happened and my body felt good with it. I mean, I could have just as easily had that eating meat if I'd felt good with that. I would have stayed doing that. It's like
the opposite of that would be an Atkins diet where it's all protein and very little.
Yeah, and if that suited my body and if it sat well with me, like this is the one thing I would do that, and that's kind of one of the things that. It's the same with the religion thing and with like all the different things. Like I'm so grateful for every religion because you mentioned Judaism a while back there when we were speaking. And like that, I mean, there are evenings where, and I have only been lucky enough once to visit a Jewish temple in Amsterdam, or the main Jewish center there. And I actually fell into that, funnily enough, on a Friday afternoon when they were preparing for Shabbat, where they were having it was getting ready for that, and they were all flowing into the temple. And I was like, I happened to be as a tourist there at that time, although I am from there initially, but I happened to be back there on holidays, and I was just looking around at stuff, and I stumbled into this, into the Jewish temple, and they were saying to me, oh, come on in, and I'm like, what is this place? I didn't even know that it was that. I just stumbled into this building because I thought it looked nice, and that got me thinking. I was like, okay, and then I had seen... I'd seen copies of the Torah on the seat and stuff like that, and there was different things, and the scrolls were there, kind of laid open. Well, not laid open, one of them was, but the other ones were behind that curtain or that thing that they have, the kind of the closed off thing. But I remember then thinking years later, this is actually years later, I thought nothing of it more on that day. I thought, oh, that's interesting, that was a Jewish temple. I wonder what that is. I said, oh, and I clocked it in my mind. I said, okay, I need to research that in the future. Not now, but in the future. So I then started looking at that a while back when I met, well, I was introduced to a friend of my uncle, and he lived in Israel for approximately 27 years, and he just recently moved back to Ireland, or had recently moved back at that time. This is going back a few years ago, and I was like, okay, and he's got children who serve in the IDF and all that, and whatever. Basically, they had to go in, and that's not going into like the army side of it. I'm just saying he lived there for years. He grew up there. His wife was Israeli and all that kind of stuff. But then it got me thinking, and I got chatting to him, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Let me chat to him. And I was chatting to him about all that stuff. And then the more I was chatting about different things, I kind of fell into looking into, Judaism, and I'm like, okay, let me see. So I looked at it, and I started watching a live service. So I did this every second week for around, I would say, 4 or 5 months, something like that. And every day on Fridays, so there's the temple in New York that has, I'm not sure the exact name. I'll link it below this video anyway, but it's the main temple in New York where they all celebrate Shabbat. And so I started watching.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I'm blanking. I don't know the name of it either, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I started watching the live service every Friday night. Well, not every Friday night, every second Friday night. And the reason I did that, because I didn't want to overload myself with stuff. But one of the parts, which was a beautiful part of that, was I was learning about different stuff. I was saying that's interesting. I agreed with some of it. I didn't agree with other parts. But the most beautiful thing in that service, or the two most beautiful things, is one part they have this kind of pause, where they're singing and they have this kind of pause, and they say, okay, number one, where they welcome the Shabbat bride in for, like, kind of welcome in the I guess Shabbat, or their Sabbath day, which is part of it, where they all kind of turn around facing the door and they say they welcome that in. And then the other part is that, they take the time to, like, have all their stuff switched off, which is a beautiful thing. I was watching it on the internet, so, but I'm not Jewish, but I'm saying then technically I wouldn't be able to watch that, because you're not supposed to be watching, which is kind of a contrast and a contradiction, or a kind of a paradoxical...
A conflict of interest.
Yeah. It's like, it's that paradox of, like, that's quite interesting. But anyway, the two parts that I took from it were, one was where they kind of, there's a pause, and they're saying pray for certain things. And I found myself, what it did for me, was it got me thinking, okay, what am I praying for? And this was just another form of prayer. It got me thinking, okay, and I started praying more for people after that, if that makes sense. So
right.
they're just,
it absolutely does.
Yeah, so that was just two things I took out of it, which I really enjoyed. I haven't watched that service since then. I watched it for maybe 4 or 5 months. Doesn't mean I think I dipped in once or twice since that time. But again, these are all tools,
There are many, many tools, Kaz, in my toolbox. And on any given day, at any given moment, I will reach in and grab whichever one I need. And I really want to focus on that real quick. The tool I need, not the tool you need, or the tool my husband needs, or a friend needs, but the tool I need to see me through whatever I'm experiencing. And I really want our audience to know that we want to create a place where people can feel free to, please, by all means, leave comments. Let's discuss these things. There's no rule. There's no wrong. It's not wrong for you to believe this or that. Does that make sense?
It does. And like I feel when you and I get together, we chat a lot, and we do all that, and there is no wrong or right way. I love it. And I interviewed Kundalini Yogini from the YouTube channel, Kundalini Yogini. Her name is Priscilla, and she said to me at the end of that interview, we were chatting, and she said, yeah, it's crazy. She said, it's like when two seekers get together, it's like, bah, 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 bah. And this is,
yes, it is.
And that's, I took that from that, and I was like, yeah, it's so true, and there is no wrong or right way. And I really, I want people to comment too, and, just say, okay, what is it? And for a long period of time, I only focused upon like I thought, because I grew up like we said earlier in this podcast, when I grew up like Catholic and all that stuff, I really thought that I was completely right. My way was the only way, and if you believed anything other than that, then you were going to hell. And I've had comments recently on videos on my YouTube channel, and I laugh at it. Not this channel, Tina and Kaz, but on Kaz Vandervaart, and comments on certain videos that I did about Islam, and I'm like, I'm getting these people in, and I laughed, and I thought, yeah, that was me. That was me defending my religion to the death, because I believed that my way was the right way. And I was able to respond to those comments by saying, I totally understand where you're coming from. I completely identify. And, you're entitled to your opinion. And I'm able to say that today. And I think that's a beautiful thing, too, because,
it really is.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful place when you find that you're not tied down by rigidity. You have the ability to kind of meet people where they're at and take what's useful and leave the rest behind. There's no... That's what I love about our chatting. We don't sit down and say, okay, we are going to speak of this today or that. Often we go in a big circle, and we touch on many different things. I always walk away feeling like I've learned something. I feel lighter and I feel happier because of it. And I want our audience to feel the same way. And I want people, if you're an atheist, there is no wrong, whether you're spiritual or not. It's okay. Leave a comment. Let us know what you want us to talk about, because that's what both you and I are wanting to do. Yeah. We're wanting to reach people, and we're wanting just to create a safe space for people to be able to comment, or for us to have discussions about topics that maybe they're not able to talk about themselves because of their environment.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly what you just said, because, and it's kind of, I guess, like, yeah, because we do, and this is important, for those who are listening, we do go around in circles, and the reason we do that is on purpose, and
yes,
because
absolutely,
yeah, because we agreed, like, and this is the thing for anyone listening. When we were saying, cause
we did not want this to be structured.
Yeah, and it's the same even with Beautiful Souls. Like, I often say to
absolutely
people coming on the interview, like a woman asked me, or I don't even call them interviews anymore, the chat. She asked me 2 days ago. She said, like, oh, what's the structure? I said, there is none. She said, great, I'm so happy you said that. And I'm like, yeah, because it takes away a lot of, well, for some people they're very comfortable speaking about whatever, but for some people they feel, oh my god, we have to keep it structured, and I see some interviewers or people looking down at sheets of paper to ask questions, and there's nothing wrong with that either if that's your goal. But our goal with this, and I think that's the interesting thing, our goal with this was like, okay, we are both, we've got so much knowledge and so many thoughts and so many different things and experience that we just want to kind of throw it together in a pot, mix it up, and say, okay, whatever comes out of this, we hope it's helpful to the audience. And we always, like Tina just said, she walks away from this feeling lighter. I walk away from this feeling lighter every single time. It's like there's something I've learned, and I'm like, okay, I might not see that straight away, but like I might be walking in 2 days' time and that thing will jump out at me and be like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, let me try that. And that's why I want people to comment, or we want people to comment under this video. And when you see it on Facebook again, you'll probably, it'll stay around for a while. It will stay within the Tena and Kaz group. It will stay on the page. But, generally sometimes things get lost. But on YouTube, when you're listening to this on YouTube, like, just comment, like, let us know. And we'll also be doing lives on YouTube as well. And so where we'll have questions and answers, and that'll be interesting too. I can't wait for that.
Oh yeah, me too.
But so the other thing I wanted to ask you then, Tina, was what we kind of, yeah, so we kind of touched on some religions and stuff like that. Like, let me ask you a question about the nun thing as well. So, the reason I say the nun thing is someone said to me recently, "Oh, why did you not pursue the priest thing?" That's what they asked me. And I said, my answer was very simply to them, and it's a true answer. I said, the reason I didn't pursue the priest thing is because the yeah, okay, like, let me say, the desires and the pleasures of this world pulled me away from it, along with those pleasures turning into absolute horrific situations regarding alcohol and different things. But that's why I didn't pursue it. Maybe it was just my path, But so my question is, with the nun, let's say the nun thing, how did it play out finally when that priest said it to you, about motherhood, and how far were you into your journey on becoming a nun and kind of,
Oh, I was just, the only thing I had left to do was to take my vows.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
I mean, I was that far into it.
Were you living in community also for a good period of time then? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
I was.
Okay.
And so, in all honesty, as soon as you asked that question, the first word that popped in my head, how did I feel when that priest said that to me? I felt like I had been cut free.
Okay, yeah.
Without guilt.
Yes.
Because I didn't want to fail or disappoint. That might not make sense, but for me, it was such a profound spiritual experience, and I was so committed to it that to suddenly be turned away from it, and of all things, for a guy, a very special guy, but a guy. I didn't know at the time that he would be my husband. But yeah, I felt liberated.
Yeah.
I felt like I was being cut free, and I also felt liberated.
That's interesting. And I met you could say, a novitiate, or someone who was studying to become a friar. Well, not studying, because what they do is, and I don't know if that's the same on nuns and stuff like that. I'm guessing it is the same, but it's a beautiful thing that you felt liberated. Number one, the thing is, what I can relate to kind of that story is that a friend, well, I would say an acquaintance, not a great friend, but someone I knew for a period of time who had come to where I was living at the time in a certain town, was decided that he so what they do is they go in for 6 months or 3 months, and they live in community, and they see, and this is before any vows are taken, or before even the thought of to become a friar is taken. They can invite you in and say, look, come and live with us, if you really feel called, and if you feel God pulling on your heartstrings, and you really feel that, okay, I'm gonna go, then they invite you in, and they'll have a few chats with you and stuff like that, and see that you're, kind of not violent or anything like that, if that makes sense, because they have to protect themselves too.
Of course.
And they'll do background checks and all that. So, but then the person that I knew was studying, not studying, he lived in community with them for around 6 months total, and then at the start, and then maybe another 3 after. And I met him on occasion during that time, and then after the 3 months, so that, like, let's say when the 9 months were finished, he so, like I said, he came in for 6 months, and then he went away, and he came back for another 3 months. And I said, oh, so, and it was nearing the time that he was, gonna decide whether he was gonna stay in or out. And he said, no, you know what, Kaz, I decided against it. He said, really enjoyed my time. I've really found it to be very, very helpful in my prayer life and my spiritual stuff like that. He said, you know what, I think it's not for me. And I said, wow. I said, that's so fantastic. And he said, I feel really happy. And I think what he said, I'm not sure now if he said liberate or not, but he used something along those lines, that he said, I just feel so happy I did it. I feel so happy I pursued it. at this time it's not for me. And I said, that's awesome. You know, I really thought,
Oh yeah.
I said it was fantastic. So, and even for anyone listening, if you're a woman and you're thinking of going to become a nun, like, or if you're a person thinking to become a priest, or I recently chatted with someone who is going to wants to become a brahmachari in an ashram in India and wants to pursue that life of completely celibate monk, and he feels that that is his path towards God, and he's decided that that's what he's going to do. And I say to all of this, fantastic, you go and try and do and see, and you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that when our hearts, less and less, I find with myself, and this is especially true in relation to my children and guiding them. I find less that I conform to any one set of rules. Instead, and sometimes my oldest son will get irritated because he'll ask me, you know, Mama, I don't know what to do here. What do you think I should do? And I'll say, you have to do what your heart calls you to do. And he'll, you know, there are times when he'll just kind of be like, oh, thanks for that very Zen answer.
Yeah.
And he's being a smart aleck. He's like, oh yeah, okay, thanks. That really helped me.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, that's what I would say to anyone who approached me thinking about taking such a journey. Follow your heart, experience it, and you'll find out soon enough. I mean, I can't speak for becoming a monk, but if you want to become a nun, you'll find out soon enough if that's for you.
Yeah.
What harm? What harm comes out of following up on it? Because to me, the saddest thing is when we look back at our life and we feel regret because we closed ourselves off to something based on what are the words I want to use? Based on some sort of prejudice.
Yeah.
I think that is the saddest thing to me. So I would rather, for instance, my oldest son isn't clear. He doesn't have really any idea what he wants to do now that he's out of high school. Maybe he'll go to college. He's going to take some classes at the community college, but he doesn't have any idea what he wants to do. Maybe he'll go to trade school. He's trying to figure that out. And I told him there aren't any rules.
I love that.
Say you have to know what you're going to be when you grow up, baby. Because I'm 47, or no, 48 now. And I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So figure, take a couple of classes. You know you're interested in AV. Take a class on AV and see how you like it. Maybe that will lead you to pursue a career in the entertainment world. Maybe it won't. But if it's something that interests you, look into it. No harm can come of that. There's no rule that says when you turn 18 and you graduate from high school, you have to go to college right then. And you have to know what you want to major in. And now he's at a place where he feels more comfortable with that. He wants me at times to make decisions for him. And I'll tell him, honey, I can't. I know you're frustrated and it breaks my heart, but I can't tell you what's right. Like, for instance, regarding college, do I go to a major university even though I have no clue what I want to do? Or do I go to a community college? Well, you do what you think you need to do.
I love that. I really do. And like you said there, that is and I wanted to say that earlier on in this podcast too, that I don't know whatever you said there made kind of struck it. I think we were speaking about, how children grow up and how they're programmed, or how we were programmed, and one of the things was that I thought about, in the future, if I have children or anything like that. And I thought about, because I thought long and hard about this. One time I would have said, "Oh no, I have to bring them up Catholic." Today, what I feel I would say to them, I would say, "Look, this is my belief. I want you to know what I believe in, and I want you to know that there are so many different things that you can pursue. And if you feel called to any one of those, I will support you, and I will try and help you, any way I can in pursuing that." And I really like that, because that's what I would say to them. I would say, I would teach them, interesting stuff too that I think is interesting, but I would try and steer away from, like, for me, I'd be kind of like, okay, look, I'd teach them and say, you can do this. But I like how you said that there, that you're not giving anyone answer, because that's great, because, like, he can then, pursue, or he'll find his way. So that's cool. That's really cool.
Well, ultimately, as a mom, what I've come to realize is that our kids, Kaz, are not objects that we possess.
Yeah.
And we have no right living our lives through our children. Tom has to be able to make his own decisions. And maybe I'll agree with it, maybe I won't, but he'll always have my unconditional love.
Yes.
And I'll support, I might not understand it, but I'll support his decision out of that love. I would like to see more parents. I don't want to anger anyone, but I really would. I would like to see more parents loving their children unconditionally instead of with conditions, because I don't know, it's their life.
I think that a cool podcast would be, and I really think what a cool podcast would be that, basically talking about that stuff, right? Like, so like, even for podcast 2 or something like that, where, like, because I don't have any experience in parenting, right? But I know that a lot of people are going to be interested in, and a lot of our listeners are going to be parents and are going to be interested in topics that come up like that. And I think also, not only are we going to have a lot of parent listeners, we're going to have a lot of teenage and parent listeners and stuff.
Yes.
And I think I would love to do a podcast with you where, talking about how, let's say, you raised your family, and I would love to talk about, how I grew up and some of the things that I kind of didn't like, let's say. And that versus, how you brought up your family and stuff, because I really like how you've brought up your family from what I know of you and stuff like that. So I think that'd be interesting. I could give kind of my thoughts on how I grew up and stuff like that, and then I kind of, maybe you could give, some, I guess, parenting tips on, to people listening, or not tips, but just suggestions maybe, or things like that. Or, I think that would be a cool thing to do, even,
Oh, I would be very excited to do that. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah.
My kids' friends, they all call me Mom.
Nice.
And I know that it wasn't just Tom that was struggling with the idea of college and what do I do if I don't know what I want to major in. All of his friends did, and it hurt me to see their struggle.
Yeah.
It hurt me to see their fear and their anxiety. Now, this ties into religion because I also saw that, I also saw pain in these kids because they were developing their own ideas about what they believed in and what they did not believe in. And many times, if they tried to discuss it with their parents or parent, it would create conflict.
Yeah.
I remember Tom announcing at 16 that he was an atheist. And my husband, he was very quiet, very calm and collected.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out why Tom and he had been talking. Something had been bothering Tom for about 2.5, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And I could sense it. And I was a nervous wreck because I couldn't figure out what was going on. But he and Rob had been talking for several hours, kind of off and on. And I thought, wow, this is really heavy.
Yeah.
What are they talking about and why am I not included? But I gave them their space.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting down on the couch and Tom, he wouldn't look at me when he said it.
Huh.
And I looked at him and I took his face in my hands and I said, baby, is this what's been bothering you? And he looked at me and he said, well, Mama, you have such a love for spirituality. I didn't want to break your heart.
Oh, wow.
And I remember telling him, sweetheart, you're 16 years old. You're going to change and grow so much in the next few years. You may not even remember this day. Now, he has gone full circle. And he really is into Taoism. But what's neat is that both he and I have not forsaken kind of our Christian foundation. And what I mean by that is we do love Jesus. And I think it's interesting that he was so passionately declaring he was an atheist, but to his dad. But then when he was talking to me, he looked like a little kid. He looked like he was afraid he was going to get grounded or something. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, this is all you have to tell me? This is it?
Yeah.
You've decided to become an atheist? Okay, I can live with that. I was thinking the worst.
Yeah.
Possible case scenarios. So it's interesting. Yeah, this has been a really neat topic for conversation because it's interesting how people develop their spiritual paths and what influences that and where they end up going. That all is something that greatly interests me.
It is, and also I just want to before we finish out, I just want to say that it interests me so much too, and it's an amazing thing to listen to that story. And also with my mom, I can say one thing, which was that always, even though like when I was abandoned as a child and she sent me off to live with my father and stuff like that, I was able to forgive her, and then later she told me why, which I'll get into in different podcasts and stuff like that. But the very, very interesting thing was she always said to me, which was, she always said, do whatever you want to do regarding, what you feel drawn to. And I really, I think that's a good place to finish on this, like, and because I related to.
That's a beautiful place.
Yeah,
and
like,
a powerful place to finish.
yeah, like it was exactly what you said to Tom. She said to me too. She was like, and even though I had immense hatred for years around what she'd done, and I didn't necessarily hate her, but I just didn't like what she did. And like,
Right.
and later, and the reason I want to finish that is because I could go into a whole nother topic on that, and I feel that, but the interesting thing is that I I just liked what she said about, like, do whatever you feel drawn to, and also like what you said, what you said to Tom. Oh, just, yeah, okay, that's cool, that's okay. And I think that we need more of that. Even though I'm not a parent, we need more of that parenting in the world, that kind of stuff. And yeah, so to conclude, I guess that's the end of podcast 1 with Tina and Kaz. We hope you've enjoyed it. Please, 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 hit. So when you're listening on YouTube, here on YouTube, like, subscribe, and share. Give us a like, comment, turn on the bell for notifications, and because we really want this message to reach a lot of people. And when you subscribe and when you turn on the bell for notifications and when you share this video, then we're able to get this message out to more people. And it's never been, like, for myself and Tina, it's never been about, like, even though this is podcast number 1, we've said the same on Beautiful Souls.
Beautiful Souls.
It's not about profit, it's not about getting anything, but what we do want and what we really say is, please, please, please share it, like, comment, subscribe, and so we can get the message out, because we believe in what we're doing is that this message, we already know, is going to change the lives of millions, like, and we do believe that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much it. Do you want to add anything, Tina, or?
Just one quick thing to top off what you topped off. the acceptance and what you said about you thinking we need more parenting like that around the world. I think that acceptance and allowing people to be who they are and grow in the direction they are going to grow in can be applied across the board to our coworkers, to our bosses, to our peers, our friends, to every single person. If we can just stop being rigid and allow people to be who they are, meet them where they're at. I think that's all. Just leaving y'all today with that message. Try meeting each other where you're at.
Yes. I want to also apologize. I don't know if you could hear it during the audio recording, but someone started mowing the grass nearby, so I hope it hasn't interrupted or interfered with the audio. But if it has, sorry, and the next time I will get a quieter spot. But this was kind of on the go today. So yeah, I want to thank you, Tina. I want to thank myself too, because I think that's important also.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
And we will see you in podcast number 2. So thanks so much, Tina. And we hope, have a great day to anyone listening also. So thanks, Tina. It's been great chatting to you. I'm happy that we're doing this, so thanks.
I am too. Thank you. Bye.